hey, I didn't see you there. Phil from MTG Kiwi Philosophy here. Check out my new brew. Catch you on the flip side. Hey, how you going, guys? Let's get this going, and we're going to kick this off with the two cards I've built this around. And that is going to be 4 copies of Hepatra, Vizier of Poisons, and 4 copies of Nest of Scarabs. Now, I love Hepatra. She's a 2-drop, 1 black, 1 green, 2/2. She has 2 abilities. When Hepatra deals combat damage to a player, you may put a negative counter on a target creature. And then her secondary ability triggers. Whenever you put 1 or more negative counters on a creature, you create a 1/1 Death Touch snake. Now, we know Hepatra is not like Nest of Scarabs. We can't trigger it multiple times. Every time we do a neg counter, we're only going to be able to get 1 snake token. Now let's talk about Nest of Scarabs. We want Nest of Scarabs to help us go wide. It doesn't matter if it's early or late. The idea is go wide, and we can use this ability to deal damage to our opponents. Alright, let's not harp on about it. Let's get into it and show some cards and how we're going to build around these two. We're going to start with our low curve cards and then move our way up to the higher cards and the cards that are going to synergize with them. We're going to start with 4 copies of Channeler's Initiate. It's a 2-drop, 1 green, 1 other. When it comes into play, it gets 3 -1 counters put on it, and then you can tap it for its second ability and remove a neg counter to add 1 mana of any color to your pool. Now, upon the Channeler entering the battlefield with 3 negative counters on it, it will trigger 1 snake and it will trigger 3 scarabs if we have either of those in play. And the bonus to the Initiate is that we can tap it to remove the counters, adding mana to the pool to get our higher curve cards into play earlier. Also removing a negative counter from it, making it stronger. So you'll want to keep removing those counters, and then we're eventually going to end up with a 3/4 creature that we can block with. It's a mid-range creature. It's not super powerful, but it will do its job in the early game. Now that's it for our 2-drops. So we have Hepatra and the Channeler's Initiate. So we've got a total of 8 creatures there that are 2-drops. So we're going to move on to our 3-drop creatures now. And the first of our 3-drop creatures is 4 copies of Obelisk Spider. Now I like the Obelisk Spider. It's a 3-drop, 1 black, 1 green, 1 other. It's 1/4 and it has reach. So we can get those pesky flying creatures. It may die because it's within that damage range. However, it does have 2 other abilities. Whenever Obelisk Spider deals combat damage to a creature, put a -1 counter on that creature. Once again, this spider is going to be triggering the Nest of Scarabs into giving us our insect tokens, and also Hepatra giving us a snake token. The spider's secondary ability is whenever you put 1 or more negative counters on a creature, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So if we can double up with some of these in play, every time we're putting negative counters, we can be gaining up to 2, 3, even 4 life at the max, which is pretty good. Moving on to our next creature, it's a 3-drop. It's 4 copies of Amonkhet Eternal, 1 black and 2 other. It's a 5/5 creature with Afflict 3, so if we can swing into our opponent and they do block, we are still going to get them to lose 3 life. Its secondary ability is an opponent casts a spell, put a negative counter on Amonkhet Eternal. Now this is going to trigger our Nest of Scarabs to get our insect tokens, and it's also going to trigger Hepatra to give our snake tokens. But not only this, if we have an Obelisk Spider in play, they're also going to synergize with that, triggering there, which in turn will give us more life. The more spells they cast, the better for us. The more tokens we get, the more damage we're going to get in. Moving on to the next 3-drop, we're going to go with 4 copies of Bane Whip Punisher. It's a 1 black and 2 other 2/2. When Bane Whip Punisher enters the battlefield, you may put a -1 counter on target creature. And then the secondary ability is sacrificing the Bane Whip Punisher to destroy target creature that has a negative counter on it. So talking about the synergy of the deck again, we're looking at the Bane Whip Punisher entering the battlefield, triggering the Nest of Scarabs and triggering the Hepatra. Finally, moving on to the last of our creatures, and these are our 4-drops. We're going to go with 2 copies of Crocodile of the Crossing. Now, Crocodile of the Crossing is a 5/4 4-drop, 1 green, 3 other. It has haste, and when the crocodile enters the battlefield, we put a negative counter on target creature we control. Once again, the synergy is it's tying in with the Nest of Scarabs and triggering an insect, and also with Hepatra triggering a snake. The bonus of the crocodile entering the battlefield and putting a negative counter on one of our own creatures is if we have a Channeler's Initiate in play, giving us another mana to spend that we can use elsewhere. Now we've gone through all the creatures that we're going to use in the deck at the moment, but what we haven't discussed is how we're going to protect these creatures. We do know that our opponent's more than likely going to have removal cards. So to curve that, we're going to go with 4 copies of Supernatural Stamina. I like Supernatural Stamina in this deck for a few reasons. My first is, it's an instant speed so we can target one of our creatures, giving it +2 until the end of the turn. Another is potentially dealing more damage to an opponent or their creatures, killing them. Secondly, what it's going to do is one of our creatures dies, we can blink it. This is really good for the Amonkhet Eternal, because if it dies, it basically blinks, comes back into play with all of its power and toughness restored. Now let's talk about our removal. At the moment we've only got the Banewhip Punisher and the negative counters and our Death Touch Snakes that we can potentially use for removal for our opponent's creatures. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add in 4 copies of Cartouche of Ambition and 4 copies of Trial of Ambition. Now, the Cartouche is a 3-drop. It's 1 black and 2 others. When it enters the battlefield, we may put a negative counter on a target creature. It also gives enchant creature +1/+1 and has lifelink. So we're going to be able to use this card to once again trigger the Nest of Scarabs, trigger Hepatra, and make our creatures stronger and have lifelink. On top of that, making our opponent's creatures weaker. And of course, in response to having a Trial of Ambition come into play and we play a Cartouche, we can then return the Trial of Ambition to our hand. Trial of Ambition is really good early game, getting rid of those small creatures, helping us get to mid game so that we can start rolling in this deck. And finally, we're going to wrap this deck up with one more card, and I'm going to go with 2 copies of Uncaged Menagerie. With Uncaged Menagerie, we're really only looking to try and get it into play on 4 or 5 mana. So if we can drop it into play in 4 mana, we can then go search for another Hepatra, we can search for another Channeler's Initiate. And if we want to go in 5 mana, we can then go searching for Banewhip Punisher, Obelisk Spider, and Amonkhet Eternal. Now that we're done with the deck building, let's move on to our lands and our man bag. Sideboard. Anyway, we're going to start with 4 copies of Blooming Marsh, and we're going to have 10 forests and 10 swamps. I'm going to keep the lands simple with this deck and just leave it at that. So let's move on to our sideboard. Now first off, we talked about earlier how we needed a little bit more protection for our creatures. Now, I understand that. I was a little bit of a struggle trying to figure out which ones I would prefer to go with. So I ended up going with the Cartouche and the Trial to be a little bit more aggressive. However, if you want to play a little bit more defensive and play the long game, you should start with these 4. Blossoming Defense, and follow it up with 4 more of Heroic Intervention. Aggressively, these cards are quite good as well. If we're attacking and one of our opponents decides to target our creature, we can jump in there with a Blossoming Defense, make it stronger, give it hexproof, survive the damage. Potentially doing it the other side, let's flip it over and we do the same thing, but this time we target our creature with the Heroic Intervention and our creature gets hexproof and indestructible. Now, it might not kill the opponent's creatures, but it does keep ours alive. The beauty of these cards is that they're both at instant speed, so we can use them at our dispersal and choose to use them whether we have offensive or defensive duties to perform. Removal, removal, removal. You can never have enough removal. So I'm going to go with 4 copies of Splendid Agony. Now Splendid Agony is in there for 2 reasons. The first is the instant speed, and the second is its ability to distribute 2 -1 counters amongst 1 or 2 target creatures. Now this is good. So if we try to target an opponent's creature and then he wants to try and hexproof it, we can always do it to another. And we do know that this card is going to trigger our Nest of Scarabs and Hepatra at instant speed, giving us that extra creature for blocking. And finally, the last card in our sideboard is 3 copies of Torment of Venom. Now the reason this is not in the deck is because of its cost. It's double black and 2 others, so it's costing us 4. We were trying to keep our curve as low as possible with our creature spells. However, it is very good. It's instant speed. You put 3 -1 counters on target creature. Its controller loses 3 life unless he or she sacrifices another non-land permanent or discards a card. It's pretty good. So once again, this card will help us trigger the Nest of Scarabs 3 times and also triggering Hapach's Snake. Well, that's all for me today. This is Phil from MTG Kiwi Philosophy signing out. Tell me what you think about my green-black tribal negative deck. Hit the like button, subscribe, drop a comment in, add suggestions. Just do it. I'll catch you on the flip side. Ciao.